The autumn rain lashed against the tall windows of Ashford House as Felicity, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, stood in her late husband's study, clutching a letter with trembling hands. 5 years of careful widowhood, 5 years of protecting her son's inheritance and her daughter's future, all threatened by 3 sentences written in an elegant, mocking hand. "Your late husband's debts are now mine to collect, Your Grace. I propose a meeting to discuss alternative arrangements. Yours, Dominic Blackwell, Earl of Ravenscar." The man whose scandalous reputation had made mothers lock their daughters away, whose gambling halls had ruined countless families, now held her family's fate in his ruthless hands. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Ashford House, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany furniture that had witnessed generations of ducal authority. Felicity stood before her dressing mirror, allowing her lady's maid to fasten the jet mourning brooch at her throat, a ritual she had performed every day for 5 years, though society no longer demanded it of her. At 30 years old, she wore her widow's weeds like armor, the somber greys and blacks, a statement of her devotion to her late husband's memory, and more importantly, a shield against the expectations of the marriage market. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford had built a life of quiet purpose in the years since Thomas's death. Her mornings were spent overseeing the education of her 12-year-old son, Edmund, the young Duke of Ashford, ensuring he learned not only Latin and mathematics, but also the compassion and integrity his father had embodied. Her afternoons belonged to her daughter, Charlotte, a spirited girl of 10, whose laughter could still chase away the shadows that sometimes gathered in the corners of Felicity's heart. Her evenings were dedicated to the charitable works that had become her passion, funding schools for working-class children, supporting widows left destitute, advocating for reforms in the workhouses that swallowed the desperate poor. London society had eventually accepted her determination to remain unwed. Some whispered that she was still too devoted to her late husband's memory. Others suggested that no man could match the love she had known. The truth was simpler and more complex. Thomas had been her childhood friend, her companion, her protector. Their marriage had been arranged by their families, but affection had grown between them, a warm, comfortable love that had sustained them through 10 years of marriage. When fever had taken him suddenly, leaving her pregnant with Charlotte and responsible for young Edmund, Felicity had made a vow at his graveside. She would never allow another man to claim authority over her children, her choices, or her life. Ashford House stood in Mayfair, a testament to generations of ducal wealth and power. Its Portland stone facade spoke of permanence. Its grand entrance hall with sweeping marble stairs whispered of aristocratic privilege. But within these walls, Felicity had created something different, a home rather than merely an estate. The formal drawing rooms were softened with fresh flowers from the conservatory. The library held not only leather-bound classics, but also her daughter's watercolors pinned to screens. The nursery, where Edmund had once played, had been transformed into a study, where the young Duke now grappled with Cicero and constitutional law under the guidance of his tutors. Her position as Dowager Duchess granted her a unique freedom. She was wealthy, titled, and beyond the age where society demanded she simper and defer. She sat on the boards of charitable organizations, attended parliamentary debates from the Ladies' Gallery, and hosted intellectual salons where reformers and radicals mingled with curious members of the aristocracy. She had built a fortress of respectability and purpose, and from within its walls she had believed herself safe. That belief shattered on a grey October morning when her late husband's solicitor, Mr. Humphrey Worthing, arrived unannounced, his usually composed face creased with anxiety. "Your Grace, I'm afraid I bring distressing news," he began, accepting the tea she poured with hands that shook slightly. "It concerns certain financial arrangements made by his late Grace before his death. Felicity felt a chill, despite the fire crackling in the grate. What kind of arrangements, Mr. Worthing? Thomas was always meticulous about the estate accounts. The solicitor cleared his throat. Indeed he was, Your Grace. However, there were certain private ventures, investments in a mining operation in Cornwall, I believe, that were financed through personal loans rather than estate funds. His Grace likely intended to repay them quickly from the profits, but the mining venture failed shortly before his death. The debts, I'm afraid, remained unpaid. How much? Felicity's voice was steady, though her heart had begun to race. £15,000, Your Grace. The sum hit her like a physical blow. £15,000, enough to fund her charities for years, enough to provide dowries for a dozen young women. Why was I not informed of this immediately after Thomas's death? The original creditor, a Mr. Silas Pemberton, was elderly and somewhat disorganized. He apparently lost track of the debt notes in his papers. When he died last month, his estate was settled and his assets were sold. The debt notes were purchased by whom, Mr. Worthing? The solicitor's discomfort deepened. By Dominic Blackwell, the Earl of Ravenscar. The name hung in the air like a curse. Even within the walls of Ashford House, sheltered as she was from the seamier aspects of society, Felicity knew of the Earl of Ravenscar. He was a figure from scandalous gossip and dire warnings, a man who had inherited his title young and promptly squandered his inheritance at the gaming tables before rebuilding his fortune by establishing gambling hells that lured desperate men to ruin. He was said to be ruthlessly intelligent, devastatingly handsome, and entirely without scruple. Mothers warned their daughters about him. Fathers refused him entry to their homes. He moved through society like a predator, taking what he wanted and discarding what he did not. Surely the debt died with Mr. Pemberton if it was not properly documented, Felicity said, though she heard the hope rather than certainty in her own voice. I'm afraid the documentation is quite legal, Your Grace, and Lord Ravenscar has made clear his intention to collect. He sent this letter. Mr. Worthing drew a folded paper from his case and handed it to her with evident reluctance. Felicity broke the seal. Plain wax, she noted, not the Earl's crest, as though he wished to maintain some discretion, and read the contents. The handwriting was bold, the phrasing mockingly courteous. Ravenscar acknowledged the debt, noted that it had gone unpaid for 5 years with accumulated interest, and suggested that he would be willing to discuss alternative arrangements that might prove mutually beneficial. He proposed a meeting at his townhouse in Grosvenor Square the following Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Alternative arrangements, Felicity repeated, the words tasting bitter. She was not naive. She knew what a man like Ravenscar might consider beneficial. Your Grace, you need not respond to such an improper summons, Mr. Worthing said quickly. I can handle any negotiations through proper legal channels. But Felicity was already calculating. £15,000 plus 5 years of interest would amount to perhaps £20,000. A staggering sum, but one she could potentially raise by selling properties, liquidating investments. However, such actions would take time and would weaken the estate at a moment when Edmund was approaching the age when he would begin taking on ducal responsibilities. Any hint of financial instability could affect his standing, his ability to make advantageous matches for himself and his sister, his authority in Parliament. More troubling was the question of what Ravenscar truly wanted. Men like him did not purchase obscure debt notes for mere profit. There were easier ways to make £20,000. No, he had sought out this particular debt for a reason, and that reason likely involved her. I will meet with him, Felicity said, cutting through Mr. Worthing's protests, but I will do so on my terms, not his. Send a reply declining his invitation, but proposing an alternative. He may call upon me here at Ashford House this Thursday at 11 o'clock in the morning. The meeting will be conducted in the presence of yourself and my companion, Mrs. Harriet Ashford, Mrs. Harriet Ashford was her late husband's aunt, a formidable woman of 70 who had come to live at Ashford House after Thomas's death and had become Felicity's staunchest ally. With Harriet present, no impropriety could be suggested, no pressure applied without witnesses. Mr. Worthing looked relieved. "A wise precaution, Your Grace. I shall send the message immediately." After the solicitor departed, Felicity sat alone in the morning room, the letter from Ravenscar still in her hands. Through the window, she could see Charlotte playing in the garden with her governess, her copper curls bright against the grey autumn day. In his study upstairs, Edmund would be puzzling over his Latin translations, his serious young face so like his father's. She had built this sanctuary for them, this life of security and purpose, and now a man whose very name represented vice and ruin held the power to destroy it all. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford rose from her chair, her spine straight, her jaw set. She had faced grief and responsibility and the subtle cruelties of a society that sought to diminish women at every turn. She would not be cowed by a scandalous earl, no matter how dangerous his reputation. But as she climbed the stairs to check on her son, Felicity could not quite suppress the tremor of fear that ran through her. She had heard too many stories about Dominic Blackwell, the Earl of Ravenscar, and none of them ended well for those who opposed him. Thursday morning arrived cold and bright. Felicity dressed with particular care, choosing a gown of deep charcoal silk that spoke of her widowhood while flattering her slender figure. She wore her late husband's family diamonds at her throat and ears, subtle reminders of the power and prestige of the Ashford name. Her golden-brown hair was swept into an elegant chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck and the determined set of her jaw. At precisely 11 o'clock, the Earl of Ravenscar was announced. Felicity had positioned herself in the formal receiving room, with Mrs. Harriet Ashford seated to her right on a carved mahogany chair, her silver hair and ramrod posture lending her the appearance of a judgmental monarch. Mr. Worthing stood near the fireplace, his leather case of documents at hand. The room itself was a statement of aristocratic authority. Portraits of previous Dukes of Ashford gazed down from the walls. The furniture was upholstered in Ashford blue, and the carpet was a priceless Aubusson that had been in the family for 3 generations. When the door opened, Felicity kept her gaze level, refusing to show either curiosity or apprehension. Dominic Blackwell entered with the easy confidence of a man who had never encountered a space he could not dominate. He was, she noted with irritation, exactly as the gossips had described, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a predator's grace. His dark hair was fashionably cut, but slightly too long, curling at his collar in a way that suggested he cared little for convention. His face was striking rather than handsome in the classical sense, strong-boned, with a blade of a nose and a mouth that curved with what might be amusement or contempt. But it was his eyes that arrested her, slate-grey, intelligent, and focused on her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see past her carefully constructed armor to the woman beneath. He wore impeccable tailoring. His coat was midnight blue superfine, his waistcoat an understated brocade, his cravat tied in a complex knot that must have taken his valet considerable effort. Diamond studs glinted at his wrists. For a man with a scandalous reputation, he dressed like a prince. "Your Grace," he said, bowing with perfect correctness. His voice was cultured, deeper than she had expected, with a hint of something that might have been mockery lurking beneath the formality. "I am honored by your invitation." "It was hardly an invitation, Lord Ravenscar," Felicity replied coolly. "I believe you are here to discuss a business matter." "Indeed." His eyes travelled briefly to Mrs. Harriet and Mr. Worthing, acknowledging their presence with small nods before returning to her. "Though I confess I had hoped for a more private conversation." "That is not possible," Felicity said, gesturing to a chair opposite her. "Please be seated and state your business plainly." Ravenscar sat with fluid ease, crossing one long leg over the other. "Very well. I shall be direct as you prefer. I hold debt notes indicating that the late Duke of Ashford owed £15,000 to Mr. Silas Pemberton. With accumulated interest over 5 years at the standard rate, the sum now stands at £22,500. I have come to collect. My late husband was a man of honour, Felicity said, her voice sharp. If he incurred such a debt, he fully intended to repay it. The fact that he died before he could do so does not reflect poorly on his character. I never suggested it did, Ravenscar replied smoothly. Death, unfortunately, settles no debts. The obligation transfers to his estate, which, if I understand correctly, is held in trust for the young Duke, with you as trustee. The estate is entailed, Mr. Worthing interjected. Her Grace cannot simply liquidate property to satisfy a personal debt of the late Duke. How inconvenient, Ravenscar murmured, though his expression suggested he had anticipated exactly this response. Then perhaps we must explore those alternative arrangements I mentioned. I will pay the debt, Felicity said firmly, refusing to let him draw out the tension. It will require time to liquidate certain investments and properties not protected by the entailment, but I can have the full sum available within 6 months. 6 months is a long time, Your Grace. I'm afraid I require a more immediate resolution. Then what do you propose, Lord Ravenscar? Speak plainly, as I have no patience for games. Something flickered in his grey eyes, surprise perhaps, or appreciation. Very well, I propose marriage. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Harriet drew in a sharp breath. Mr. Worthing made a strangled sound. Felicity felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. You cannot be serious, she said, her voice deadly quiet. I am entirely serious. Ravenscar leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. Consider the logic, Your Grace. You need the debt forgiven. I can do that immediately. I need respectability. A connection to one of England's premier ducal families would rehabilitate my reputation considerably. Your children would benefit from having a stepfather with political connections and business acumen. You would benefit from having a husband who can protect you from other vultures who might seek to exploit a widow, no matter how formidable she appears. This is outrageous, Mrs. Harriet snapped, her voice quavering with fury. You dare to enter this house and make such a proposal. Felicity, send him away at once. But Felicity held up a hand, silencing her companion. Her mind was racing, analyzing Ravenscar's words for hidden meanings and traps. You speak of logic and mutual benefit, Lord Ravenscar, but you omit the most relevant fact. You are notorious. Your reputation is in tatters. You own gambling establishments that ruin men. You consort with actresses and courtesans. You have been refused entrance to Almack's and half the respectable homes in London. Why on earth would I bind myself and my children to such a man? Because I am honest about who I am, Ravenscar replied, and for the first time she heard something other than mockery in his voice, something harder, edged with bitterness. I do not pretend to be a saint, Your Grace. I own gambling hells, yes, because men will gamble whether I provide the venue or not. I prefer they lose their money to me in establishments where the games are honest, rather than to cheaters in back alleys. I consort with actresses because they are more interesting than simpering debutantes. And I have been refused entrance to society's sacred spaces because I had the audacity to be born to a father who drank away his fortune and left me with nothing but debts and a crumbling title. He rose from his chair, his tall frame suddenly seeming to fill the room. I rebuilt my fortune through wit and work, Your Grace. I make no apologies for the methods I used, and now I am in a position to offer you something valuable, freedom from financial ruin and the protection of a husband who will not seek to control you. I have no interest in managing your household, interfering with your children's upbringing, or curtailing your charitable works. I simply want the respectability your name can provide and the satisfaction of knowing I have secured one of society's great prizes. I am not a prize to be won, Felicity said, rising to face him. They stood nearly eye to eye, for she was tall for a woman, and the fury in her voice matched his intensity. "I am a woman who has spent 5 years building a life of independence and purpose. I will not surrender that to a man, any man, merely to escape a debt." "Yeah, then what will you do?" Ravenscar asked softly, dangerously. "Sell your properties? Beg loans from friends? Watch your son's inheritance eroded and your daughter's prospects diminished because of your pride?" The words struck like blows because they contained truth. Felicity felt the walls of her sanctuary closing in. She could not raise £22,000 without causing significant damage to her family's position. And if word spread that the Dowager Duchess of Ashford was in financial difficulty, the vultures would indeed circle. Creditors, fortune hunters, and society gossips, all eager to see the proud widow brought low. "I need time to consider," she said, her voice strained. "You have 1 week," Ravenscar replied. "After that I will be forced to pursue other remedies, legal actions that will become public and will raise precisely the questions about the Ashford family's stability that you most wish to avoid." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. For a moment his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "For what it's worth, Your Grace, I did not undertake this course lightly. But I find myself in need of what you possess, and I have learned that in this world one must seize opportunities when they arise. I hope you will see the wisdom in accepting my proposal." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Felicity standing in the receiving room with her companions and the ruins of her carefully constructed world. "You cannot possibly be considering this," Mrs. Harriet said, her voice breaking. "Felicity, he is everything your dear Thomas was not. Ruthless, scandalous, dangerous." "I know," Felicity whispered. She sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "But he is also right. I cannot raise that sum without doing irreparable harm to Edmund and Charlotte's futures. And if I refuse him, he will make this debt public. The scandal alone could prevent Charlotte from making a good match when she comes of age." "Surely there must be another way," Mr. Worthing ventured. "Perhaps we could appeal to your family, or to the current Duke's trustees." "No." Felicity's voice was firm. "I will not go begging to relatives who have always resented Thomas's choice to marry me, and I will not give Edmund's trustees any reason to question my management of the estate." She looked at the two people who had been her allies and supports through 5 years of widowhood. "I need time to think. Please, leave me alone for a while." "Boy." When they had reluctantly departed, Felicity moved to the window, looking out at the autumn garden where Charlotte had played just days ago. Her daughter's laughter seemed to echo in memory, mingling with Edmund's serious voice, reading aloud from his Latin texts. Dominic Blackwell, Earl of Ravenscar, was offering her a devil's bargain: respectability for him, financial salvation for her, and a marriage that would bind her to a man whose very existence challenged everything she had built. The question was whether she had the strength to refuse, and whether refusal would cost her more than acceptance. Felicity did not sleep that night, nor the night after. She paced the corridors of Ashford House, played with scenarios and calculations, and ultimately arrived at a decision that felt less like choice than like surrender to inevitable forces. She would marry the Earl of Ravenscar, but she would do so on terms that protected her children and preserved as much of her independence as possible. On Monday morning, she summoned Mr. Worthing and instructed him to draft a marriage contract so comprehensive and protective that even the most calculating fortune hunter would balk. She would retain full control of her personal property and income. She would maintain complete authority over her children's upbringing and education. She would continue her charitable work without interference. And most importantly, the marriage would be in name only. Separate bedchambers, separate lives, with social appearances maintained for the sake of propriety. "He will never agree to such terms," Mr. Worthing said, shaking his head. "Then he will have to sue for his £22,000 and explain to society why he is persecuting the widow of a respected duke," Felicity replied. "Send him my conditions. Let us see how badly he wants his respectability. The response came within hours. Ravenscar agreed to every term, without alteration or complaint. Felicity stared at his brief note of acceptance, feeling simultaneously relieved and unsettled. A man who accepted such restrictions was either desperate for social rehabilitation or playing a game whose rules she had not yet discerned. The marriage was arranged with shocking speed. Ravenscar procured a special license, sparing them the indignity of banns being read in church. The ceremony would take place in the private chapel at Ashford House, with only immediate family and necessary witnesses in attendance. Felicity informed her children with careful calm, explaining that Lord Ravenscar was a business associate of their late father's, and that this marriage would resolve certain financial complications. Edmund, at 12, was old enough to sense that something was amiss. "Is this man a good man, Mother?" he asked, his young face grave. Felicity knelt before her son, taking his hands in hers. "He is a complicated man, darling, but I believe he will honor his word to me, and he has promised not to interfere in our family life. Your father's memory will always be sacred in this house, and no one will ever replace him in our hearts." De Charlotte, more trusting at 10 years old, simply asked, "Will he be kind to us?" "I will ensure that he is," Felicity promised, praying she could keep that vow. The wedding took place on a misty morning in late October. Felicity wore dove-grey silk, a compromise between mourning and celebration, with her late husband's diamonds at her throat. Ravenscar arrived precisely on time, dressed in impeccable black and silver, his expression unreadable. They stood before the elderly vicar, who had baptized both of Felicity's children, and spoke vows that felt like a peculiar form of business contract. Ravenscar's voice was steady, his responses clear. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, a heavy gold band engraved with his family crest, his touch was warm and brief, his grey eyes meeting hers with something that might have been respect or calculation. "You may kiss the bride," the vicar intoned. Ravenscar raised one dark eyebrow in silent question. Felicity nodded fractionally. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a chaste, formal kiss that nonetheless sent an unexpected jolt through her body. Then it was over, and she was the Countess of Ravenscar, though she would continue to be known as the Dowager Duchess of Ashford in society. The wedding breakfast was a subdued affair. Mrs. Harriet maintained an icy silence toward the groom. Mr. Worthing looked as though he were attending a funeral. Edmund watched Ravenscar with wary curiosity. Charlotte, irrepressible even in strange circumstances, asked the Earl if he liked horses. "Very much," Ravenscar replied, his stern expression softening slightly as he addressed the child. "I have a black stallion named Tempest, who is the terror of Hyde Park. Could I ride him someday?" Charlotte asked eagerly. "Charlotte, that's presumptuous," Felicity began, but Ravenscar interrupted. "When you are a bit older and have demonstrated excellent horsemanship, perhaps you may try," he said. "Tempest requires a skilled rider." The girl beamed, and Felicity felt a reluctant flicker of gratitude toward her new husband for handling the interaction with grace. After the breakfast, Ravenscar requested a private word. They withdrew to Thomas's study, her study now, she reminded herself, though it still felt like trespassing in her late husband's domain. "I will be moving some of my belongings here over the next few days," Ravenscar said without preamble. "For appearances, we should be seen to be residing together, though I will maintain my own townhouse for business purposes. I assume you have prepared suitable chambers for me?" "The blue suite in the east wing," Felicity replied. "It is well appointed and sufficiently distant from the family quarters." "Practical," he murmured. "You are nothing if not practical, Your Grace. Or should I say, Lady Ravenscar? I prefer to remain the Dowager Duchess of Ashford in public," Felicity said firmly. "Our marriage contract stipulates that I may retain my previous title." "So it does." He moved to the window, looking out at the garden with his hands clasped behind his back. "I want you to know that I meant what I said. I have no intention of interfering in your life or your children's upbringing. I require only that you appear at my side for certain social functions. the ones where your presence will be most beneficial to my rehabilitation." "How many such functions?" Felicity asked, ever practical. "Perhaps 1 or 2 per week during the season. Less during the autumn and winter months. I will give you advance notice whenever possible." He turned back to face her. "In return, I will be a generous husband. Any household expenses you incur will be met from my accounts. If your children require anything, tutors, masters, clothing, entertainment, you need only inform my secretary, and I will make additional funds available for your charitable work." "I do not want your money for charity," Felicity said sharply. "My causes will remain funded by my own resources." His mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Pride, Your Grace? How aristocratic of you! But consider, I have more money than I can possibly spend in a lifetime, acquired through enterprises you find distasteful. Would it not be a form of justice to redirect that wealth toward worthy causes? Think of it as robbing the robber to feed the poor." Felicity hesitated, caught by the unexpected logic. "I would need complete control over how such funds are distributed. Naturally, I would not presume to tell you how to conduct your philanthropy any more than you would tell me how to run my businesses." He paused, then added, "We are partners in this arrangement, Your Grace. Strange partners, perhaps, but partners nonetheless. I gain respectability. You gain financial security. Your children gain protection from fortune hunters and creditors, and London's poor gain a well-funded patroness. Everyone benefits, except that you have bound me to you through coercion," Felicity said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "You purchased my late husband's debt specifically to create this situation. Do not pretend this is anything other than what it is. A calculated maneuver to force a connection to aristocracy that you could never have achieved honestly." For the first time, she saw genuine anger flash in Ravenscar's eyes. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his gaze. "You are correct that I purchased the debt deliberately. You are correct that I wanted a connection to your family. But you are wrong about my methods. I could have demanded immediate payment and forced you to sell properties at ruinous prices. I could have made the debt public and enjoyed watching you squirm. Instead, I offered you a solution that allows you to retain everything you value: your children, your home, your independence, your dignity. If that is coercion, it is the gentlest form ever practiced." They stood almost touching, the tension between them electric and dangerous. Felicity forced herself not to step back, not to show weakness. "You will forgive me if I do not thank you for your mercy, my lord." "I expect nothing from you, Your Grace," Ravenscar said softly, "except that you honor our agreement, appear at my side when required, allow society to see us as a respectable married couple. In return, you will have freedom most wives can only dream of." He stepped back, the moment of intensity broken. "I will send for my belongings tomorrow. Good day, Your Grace." After he departed, Felicity sank into the chair behind the desk and allowed herself a single moment of weakness. She had just married a man she barely knew, a man whose reputation marked him as everything her late husband had not been. She had done it to protect her children and preserve her independence, but the cost felt impossibly high. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Harriet entered, her face etched with concern. "How are you bearing up, my dear?" "I am managing," Felicity said, summoning a smile she did not feel. "It is done, Harriet. For better or worse, I'm now the Earl of Ravenscar's wife." "You are still yourself," Mrs. Harriet said fiercely, crossing the room to embrace her. "You are still Felicity, Dowager Duchess of Ashford, mother, philanthropist, and the strongest woman I know. A husband, especially one kept at arm's length, cannot change that." Felicity returned the embrace gratefully. "I hope you're right, but I cannot shake the feeling that I have invited a wolf into our sanctuary, and wolves are not easily controlled." "Then we will watch him carefully," Mrs. Harriet replied. "And if he steps out of line, we will remind him exactly who he has married." In the days that followed, Ravenscar moved into the Blue Suite with minimal fanfare. His servants were efficient and quiet, his belongings tasteful if somewhat ostentatious, fine paintings, expensive books, a collection of what looked like archaeological artifacts. He took breakfast in his rooms, dined at his club most evenings, and spent his days managing his business enterprises. Felicity saw him only at the occasional dinner, and found their interactions civil but distant. Society, predictably, erupted with gossip. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford had married the scandalous Earl of Ravenscar. Impossible. Shocking. Fascinating. Invitations poured in from hostesses eager to observe the unlikely couple firsthand. Felicity declined most, but accepted a few strategic appearances at events where her presence alongside Ravenscar would signal that she had not been coerced or debased by the marriage. At a musicale hosted by Lady Pemberton, Felicity arrived on Ravenscar's arm, her head high despite the whispers that followed them. He played his part perfectly, attentive but not possessive, respectful but not obsequious. When Lady Pemberton made a sly comment about unlikely matches, Ravenscar replied smoothly, "I am merely fortunate that Her Grace saw past society's prejudices to the man beneath. I consider myself the most blessed of husbands." Felicity nearly choked on her champagne, but managed to nod graciously. It was at that musicale that she met Dr. David Thornfield, a physician recently returned from working in the industrial north of England. He approached her during the interval, his manner earnest and unaffected. "Your Grace, I hope you will forgive my boldness, but I have long admired your work with the Metropolitan Widows Fund. I wondered if I might discuss with you some observations I made regarding the health conditions in the northern factories. I believe there may be opportunities for targeted charitable intervention." Felicity's interest was immediately engaged. Dr. Thornfield was perhaps 35, with warm brown eyes, prematurely greying hair, and the slightly rumpled appearance of a man more concerned with his work than his wardrobe. They spoke for nearly 20 minutes about child mortality rates, workplace safety, and the desperate need for medical care among factory workers. When Ravenscar appeared at her elbow, Felicity made introductions. The two men shook hands with visible wariness, the doctor's gaze assessing, the Earl's coolly polite. "Your wife is remarkably well informed about public health matters, my lord," Dr. Thornfield said. "Her Grace has always been dedicated to improving the lives of those less fortunate," Ravenscar replied. "I trust you will not monopolize her entirely this evening, Doctor. I believe the second half of the performance is about to begin." As they returned to their seats, Felicity felt a flicker of irritation. "Dr. Thornfield is precisely the sort of contact I need if I am to expand my charitable work. You needn't have interrupted." "I needn't have," Ravenscar agreed quietly, "but every eye in this room is watching us, and I will not have society's gossip suggesting that my wife finds her new husband so intolerable that she seeks out other male companions at every opportunity." Felicity opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Infuriating as it was, he was right. Their marriage was too new, too scandalous, too vulnerable to malicious interpretation. She would need to be more careful. But as the soprano began a mournful aria, Felicity found her thoughts returning to Dr. Thornfield's warm eyes and genuine passion for his work. She had spent 5 years building her sanctuary of independence. Now she had married a man who threatened that sanctuary with every calculated move. The question was whether she could maintain her freedom while bound to a husband whose very presence challenged everything she had fought to protect. 3 weeks into her marriage, Felicity received an invitation that changed everything. The Duke of Somerton was hosting his annual winter ball, one of the most prestigious events of the season. An invitation to Somerton House represented the pinnacle of social acceptance. The Duke was known for his rigid standards. No one with the slightest breath of scandal attended his balls. The invitation was addressed to the Earl and Countess of Ravenscar in elegant calligraphy. Felicity stared at it in disbelief, then summoned Ravenscar to the drawing room. He arrived within the hour, dressed for riding, his dark hair wind-blown. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, pulling off his riding gloves. She held up the invitation. "Did you arrange this?" Ravenscar's expression remained neutral as he took the card and read it. "No, though I confess I hoped it might come. The Duke of Somerton is perhaps the most influential arbiter of social respectability in England. If he has sent us an invitation, it means he considers our marriage legitimate rather than scandalous." "But why would he?" Felicity demanded. "Your reputation—" "My reputation is being reassessed," Ravenscar interrupted calmly. "I am no longer simply a gambling hell owner. I am the husband of the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, stepfather to a young duke, and patron, through your work, of numerous charitable causes. I am also, though you may not be aware, an investor in several industrial enterprises that provide employment to hundreds of workers. The Duke of Somerton is a pragmatist. He recognizes that I have become a man of substance and influence." Felicity sank onto the settee, turning the invitation over in her hands. "And you believe attending this ball will complete your social rehabilitation?" "I believe it will open doors that have been closed to me my entire adult life," Ravenscar said quietly. He moved to stand before the fireplace, his profile outlined in the flames. "I was born to a title, and nothing else, Your Grace. My father drank and gambled until our estates were mortgaged beyond redemption. I was 15 when he died, leaving me with a crumbling manor house and debts that would have taken a lifetime to repay through honest means. So I found other means." He turned to face her, his grey eyes intense. "I built my fortune from nothing, using the only assets I possessed, a quick mind and a willingness to risk everything. I bought my first gambling establishment with borrowed money and turned it profitable within 6 months. I reinvested every penny, expanded, bought properties in better locations. Within 5 years, I had repaid all my father's debts and restored our family estates. Within 10, I was wealthier than most of the aristocrats who refused to acknowledge me." "But wealth does not erase how it was acquired," Felicity said softly. "No," Ravenscar agreed, "which is why I need what you can provide. The sheen of respectability that comes from association with an unimpeachably noble family. The Duke of Somerton's invitation suggests I am achieving that goal." Felicity studied her husband, and she still found it strange to think of him that way, with new eyes. She had dismissed him as a fortune hunter and social climber, but his story was more complex. He had been dealt impossible circumstances and had fought his way to success through means society deplored but could not quite ignore. "Will you attend with me?" Ravenscar asked. "I know we agreed to minimal public appearances, but this ball represents a significant opportunity." "I will attend," Felicity said after a moment, "but not solely for your benefit. The Duke of Somerton's wife is a patroness of several charities that align with my interests. If I can secure her support, I can expand my work considerably." "Then we both have reason to make a good impression," Ravenscar said, and there was something in his tone that might have been approval. "I will arrange for appropriate jewels from my family collection. The Countess of Ravenscar should be dressed accordingly." "I have jewels," Felicity protested. "You have the Ashford diamonds, which you wear as armor and memorial," Ravenscar replied shrewdly. "I am offering you the Ravenscar emeralds, which have not been worn in public for 20 years. They will make a statement." Despite herself, Felicity was curious. What kind of statement? That you are not merely the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, widow of a respected peer, you are also the Countess of Ravenscar, wife of a man who has clawed his way to power and wealth, that you contain both grace and steel." He paused. "Much like the jewels themselves." The night of the Somerton ball arrived cold and clear. Felicity dressed with meticulous care, choosing a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her coloring and moved like water with each step. Her lady's maid arranged her hair in an elaborate coronet of braids, woven with gold thread, and when Ravenscar's secretary delivered the Ravenscar emeralds, Felicity caught her breath. The necklace was a masterpiece. Brilliant green stones set in intricate gold filigree, with matching earrings and a bracelet. The emeralds caught the light with a fire that seemed almost alive. When she fastened them around her throat, they felt cool and heavy, a physical weight of history and power. Ravenscar was waiting in the entrance hall when she descended. He looked magnificent in black evening clothes, his cravat pinned with a single large emerald that matched her necklace. When he saw her, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, then something else she could not quite identify. "You are breathtaking," he said simply. "The jewels are merely ornament. You are the true masterpiece." Felicity felt heat rise in her cheeks and cursed her body's betrayal. "Thank you," she managed. "You are presentable yourself." His mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "High praise indeed from my Duchess." They travelled to Somerton House in Ravenscar's carriage, a gleaming black vehicle emblazoned with his family crest. The silence between them was charged with tension, not hostility precisely, but awareness. Felicity found herself hyper-conscious of his presence beside her, the breadth of his shoulders in the confined space, the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to him. "Are you nervous?" he asked quietly. "Should I be?" "Perhaps a little. We are about to walk into the lion's den. Every eye will be upon us. Every word will be scrutinized for signs of discord or impropriety. Then we shall give them nothing to criticize," Felicity said, though her heart was racing. "We shall be the picture of a respectable married couple." "Can you do that convincingly?" Ravenscar's tone held a challenge. "Can you stand beside me without flinching, dance with me without stiffness, smile at me as though I am not the man who coerced you into marriage?" Felicity turned to face him fully, her green eyes blazing. "I am an aristocrat, my lord. I have spent my entire life maintaining perfect composure in situations I found intolerable. I smiled through 100 social events while grieving my husband's death. I made pleasant conversation with women who pitied me behind their fans. I can certainly manage to appear content in your company for one evening." "Then we are well matched," Ravenscar said softly, "for I have spent my entire life pretending not to care that I was excluded from the very society that now welcomes me through your aegis." Somerton House blazed with light, its windows glowing golden against the winter night. The entrance hall was a symphony of marble and gilt, with enormous chandeliers casting sparkling illumination over the assembled guests. Footmen in the Duke's livery announced each arrival, their voices carrying through the vast space. "The Earl and Countess of Ravenscar," the footman intoned. Every head turned. Felicity felt the weight of 100 gazes and kept her spine straight, her chin high. Ravenscar's hand was firm at the small of her back, guiding her forward with confidence. They descended the stairs together, a striking pair, he dark and powerful, she luminous in green silk and emeralds. The Duke and Duchess of Somerton received them with cool politeness. The Duke, a silver-haired man, with the autocratic bearing of his lineage, nodded acknowledgement. The Duchess, considerably younger and known for her charitable work, smiled more warmly. "Your Grace, Lord Ravenscar, we are delighted you could attend," the Duchess said. "I have been hoping to speak with you, Duchess, about your work with the Widows' Fund. I believe we may have mutual interests." "I would be honoured to discuss it, Your Grace," Felicity replied, and felt genuine pleasure at the prospect. As they moved into the ballroom, Ravenscar leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "You see, already your respectability opens doors for you as well." Before Felicity could respond, they were approached by Dr. David Thornfield. The physician bowed respectfully, his warm eyes lighting with recognition. "Your Grace, Lord Ravenscar, what a pleasure. I had not expected to see you here." "Dr. Thornfield," Felicity replied, smiling. "Are you acquainted with the Duke?" "His Grace has supported my work establishing a medical clinic in Whitechapel," the doctor explained. I am here more as an exhibit than a guest, proof of his enlightened patronage of useful enterprises. Ravenscar's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at Felicity's back. How admirable. His Grace is known for his discerning investments in worthy causes. There was an edge to his tone that made Felicity glance up sharply. The two men were regarding each other with barely veiled hostility, the Earl's grey eyes cool and assessing, the doctor's brown ones challenging. "Dr. Thornfield was telling me about his clinic when we met at Lady Pemberton's musical," Felicity said, attempting to ease the tension. "It sounds like precisely the sort of enterprise that could benefit from expanded support." "Indeed," Ravenscar said flatly. "Perhaps you should arrange a time to visit the clinic, my dear. I'm sure the doctor would be delighted to give you a personal tour." The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable. Thornfield's jaw tightened. "I would be honored to show Her Grace our work. The clinic serves hundreds of patients weekly, men, women, and children who would otherwise have no access to medical care. It is work that requires not only funding, but genuine compassion." The implication that Ravenscar possessed neither hung in the air between them. "Compassion is a luxury afforded to those who have never faced true hardship," Ravenscar replied softly, dangerously. "Those of us who have clawed our way up from nothing understand that survival requires harder virtues, discipline, determination, and the willingness to do what is necessary, even if what is necessary involves profiting from others' weaknesses." Thornfield's voice remained steady, but his contempt was clear. "Your establishments are well known, my lord. I treat men every week who have gambled away their wages at your tables, leaving their families destitute." Felicity felt Ravenscar go rigid beside her. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. She realized with horror that they were attracting attention. Other guests were turning to watch the confrontation. "That is quite enough," she said firmly, stepping between the two men. "Dr. Thornfield, I appreciate your passion for your work, but this is neither the time nor place for such discussions. Lord Ravenscar, I believe the dancing is about to begin. We should take our places." She placed her hand on Ravenscar's arm, applying gentle pressure. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. She could feel the rage coiled in his muscles, but then he covered her hand with his and inclined his head stiffly to the doctor. "As my wife says, good evening, Dr. Thornfield." They moved away, but Felicity could feel her husband's fury in every line of his body. When they reached the edge of the ballroom, she turned to face him. "What were you thinking?" she hissed. "We came here to demonstrate respectability, not to engage in public quarrels." "He insulted me," Ravenscar bit out. "He suggested I prey on the weak for profit." "And do you not?" The words escaped before Felicity could stop them. Ravenscar's eyes flashed with something that might have been pain before anger swallowed it. "You know nothing about what I do or why I do it. You stand there in your emeralds and your righteousness, judging me as every other aristocrat has judged me, as though I am a predator and not a man trying to survive in a world that offered me nothing but contempt." "Then explain yourself," Felicity challenged. "Make me understand why you own gambling establishments, if not for profit at others' expense." "Because I learned, Your Grace, that this world is divided into wolves and sheep, and I refuse to be devoured." His voice was low, intense. "Do you want to know what my businesses really are? They are honest gambling in a dishonest industry. My establishments turn away men who cannot afford to lose. We extend no credit. We employ croupiers who play fair rather than cheating. Yes, men still lose money because they choose to gamble, but they lose it to honest games, not rigged tables in back alleys run by criminals who would cut their throats if they protest." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "I am not the villain your doctor friend paints me to be. I am simply a man who learned to navigate the shadows because the light was denied to me, and I will not apologize for surviving." Felicity stared at her husband, seeing him clearly for the first time. Behind the sophisticated facade, the expensive clothes, the cool control, was a man who had been fighting his entire life against poverty, against prejudice, against a society that measured worth by birth rather than merit. He had become ruthless because ruthlessness was required. He had built his fortune in the shadows because the respectable avenues were closed to him. "I begin to understand," she said quietly. "But you must also understand that perception matters. Men like Dr. Thornfield see only the surface, the gambling establishments, the scandalous reputation. If you want true acceptance, you must give them something else to see." "Such as?" Ravenscar's tone was skeptical. "Use your wealth for visible good. Fund hospitals, schools, workhouses. Become known as a patron of reform as well as a proprietor of vice. Show society that you are more complex than their simple judgments allow." Ravenscar studied her for a long moment, then slowly, reluctantly nodded. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps the Countess of Ravenscar's reputation for philanthropy can become mine as well." "Then we have found common ground," Felicity said. "You want respectability. I want resources to expand my charitable work. Together, we can achieve both." The music swelled, a waltz beginning. Ravenscar extended his hand. "Will you dance with me, Your Grace? Let us give society something to talk about besides my quarrel with your earnest physician." Felicity placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. His arm came around her waist, holding her at the proper distance, but with unmistakable strength. They began to move, and Felicity was surprised to discover that he danced beautifully, smooth, confident, guiding her through the turns with practiced ease. "Where did a gambling hall proprietor learn to waltz?" she murmured. "Where did you learn that all proprietors of gambling establishments lack refinement?" he countered. "I may have rebuilt my fortune through vice, but I was raised an earl. My father may have been a drunkard and a wastrel, but my mother insisted I receive a gentleman's education before she died. I can dance, fence, read Latin, and discourse on philosophy. I simply choose to use those skills in ways society finds distasteful." They whirled across the ballroom, the emeralds at Felicity's throat catching the candlelight with each turn. She was aware of eyes watching, assessing, judging. But she was also aware of the man holding her, the warmth of his hand at her waist, the strength in his frame, the intelligence in his grey eyes. "This marriage may not be what either of us wanted," Ravenscar said quietly as the dance drew to a close. "But perhaps it can be more than we expected. You want to change the world, Your Grace. I can give you the resources to do so. In return, perhaps you can teach me how to exist in the light rather than always in the shadows." The music ended. They stood facing each other, neither moving. Then Ravenscar bowed, Felicity curtsied, and they stepped apart. But as she moved through the remainder of the evening, accepting congratulations and fielding curious questions about her new husband, Felicity could not quite shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, something that made her marriage of convenience feel significantly more complicated than she had anticipated. In the weeks following the Somerton ball, an uneasy partnership developed between Felicity and Ravenscar. He attended her charitable committee meetings, sat through tedious discussions of workhouse reforms, and wrote substantial checks for her various causes. She appeared at his side at strategic social events, lending her impeccable reputation to his rehabilitation. Slowly, imperceptibly, society's view of the Earl of Ravenscar began to shift. "He is not so terrible as we thought," Lady Pemberton confided to Felicity at a tea. "Why, I heard he donated £5,000 to the Foundling Hospital. And he's supporting Dr. Thornfield's clinic in Whitechapel," another lady added. "That shows real social conscience." Felicity smiled and murmured appropriate responses, but inwardly she felt troubled. The donations were genuine. Ravenscar had kept his word about funding her charitable work, but there was a calculated quality to his generosity that made her uneasy. He was buying respectability as deliberately as he had once bought properties and businesses. What disturbed her more was her own changing perception of her husband. She had expected to maintain cool distance, but found herself increasingly drawn into conversation with him. He was wickedly intelligent, well-read despite his unconventional education, and possessed a dry wit that caught her off guard. When they dined together, which happened more frequently as their public partnership deepened, he told her stories about his business ventures that were surprisingly entertaining. "The problem with aristocrats who gamble," he said one evening over roast pheasant, "is that they believe their birth entitles them to luck. They sit down at my tables expecting to win because they are marquises or viscounts, and they are genuinely shocked when the cards refuse to respect their pedigree." Despite herself, Felicity laughed. "And you take no pleasure in relieving them of their money?" "Oh, I take considerable pleasure," Ravenscar admitted, his grey eyes glinting. "Not from the money itself, but from the lesson. Equality exists nowhere in English society except at the gaming table. There, a duke and a merchant's son have equal chances. I find that deeply satisfying." It was during one of these dinners that Edmund appeared in the doorway looking uncertain. At 13, he was caught between boyhood and manhood, his voice cracking and his limbs gangly. "Mother, forgive the interruption, but I have a question about my mathematics assignment. Mr. Pemberton has set me a problem involving compound interest that I cannot solve." Before Felicity could respond, Ravenscar set down his wineglass. "May I see the problem?" Edmund approached cautiously, holding out his slate. Ravenscar studied it briefly. "Ah, yes. Compound interest can be tricky. The key is understanding that you're calculating interest not just on the principal, but on the accumulated interest from previous periods. Here," he picked up a pencil and began sketching out the solution, explaining each step clearly. Felicity watched in surprise as her son leaned over Ravenscar's shoulder, following the explanation with growing comprehension. When the Earl finished, Edmund's face lit up. "I understand. It's actually quite elegant when you see it properly." "Thank you, sir." "Mathematics is the language of commerce," Ravenscar said. "Master it, and you'll never be cheated in business dealings. I can recommend some advanced texts if you're interested." "I would like that very much," Edmund said, then glanced at his mother. "If Mother approves, of course." Felicity felt something soften in her chest. "I approve. Thank you, Lord Ravenscar." After Edmund departed, she regarded her husband thoughtfully. "You are good with him. I had not expected that, because you assumed a man of my background would be incapable of fatherly concern." Ravenscar's tone held edge. "I may not be his father, Your Grace, but I am not a monster. The boy is intelligent and curious. I see no reason not to encourage those qualities." "I did not mean to imply," Felicity began, but he held up a hand. "Yes, you did. You have thought me a villain from the moment we met. Perhaps I am, in some respects. But I am also capable of recognizing worth when I see it, and your son has considerable worth." The conversation ended awkwardly, but the incident lodged in Felicity's mind. Her carefully maintained wall of resentment toward Ravenscar was developing cracks, and she found herself uncertain whether to shore it up or allow it to crumble. The situation became more complicated when Dr. David Thornfield began calling at Ashford House to discuss the expansion of his Whitechapel clinic. Felicity had volunteered to help organize fundraising, and the doctor needed her expertise. Their meetings were always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Harriet, but Felicity could not help noticing the warmth in Thornfield's brown eyes, the genuine respect with which he treated her. "You have a rare gift, Your Grace," he said during one visit. "Most aristocratic ladies engage in charity as a fashionable pastime. You approach it with the seriousness it deserves. You understand that these are real people with real suffering, not merely statistics in a report." "I believe we have a duty to those less fortunate," Felicity replied. "Privilege without responsibility is merely selfishness." "Precisely," Thornfield leaned forward earnestly. "If only more of your class shared that view. But most are like—" He stopped himself abruptly. "Like my husband?" Felicity finished quietly. Thornfield had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Forgive me, I should not speak ill of Lord Ravenscar in his own home, though I confess I struggle to understand how a woman of your principles came to marry such a man." Felicity felt a flare of unexpected defensiveness. "Lord Ravenscar is more complex than you allow, Doctor. Yes, he owns gambling establishments, but he also funds hospitals and schools. He may have built his fortune through unconventional means, but he did so because conventional paths were denied to him." "You defend him?" Thornfield observed with surprise. "I defend the truth," Felicity corrected. "My husband is not a villain from a Gothic novel. He is a man shaped by difficult circumstances, who made choices I might not have made, but which I am beginning to understand." That evening, Ravenscar returned home earlier than usual and requested a word in private. When they were alone in the study, he turned to face her with an expression she could not quite read. "I understand Dr. Thornfield has been visiting frequently. He comes to discuss the clinic fundraising," Felicity said, immediately defensive. "Our meetings are entirely proper." "I did not suggest otherwise." Ravenscar moved to pour himself a brandy. "But I am not blind, Your Grace. The good doctor admires you, and I suspect the feeling may be mutual." Felicity felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That is absurd. Dr. Thornfield is a colleague in charitable work, nothing more." "Is he?" Ravenscar's grey eyes pinned her. "Because if I am reading the situation correctly, he represents everything you wish I was. Noble, selfless, devoted to helping others rather than profiting from their weaknesses. He is the virtuous contrast to your morally compromised husband." "This conversation is inappropriate," Felicity said sharply, rising from her chair. But Ravenscar was faster. He crossed the room and caught her wrist gently but firmly. "It is entirely appropriate. We are married, Your Grace. Perhaps in name only, as our contract stipulates, but married nonetheless. And I will not be made a cuckold, not even an emotional one, by your admirable physician." They stood close, tension crackling between them. Felicity was intensely aware of his hand on her wrist, the heat of his body, the scent of sandalwood, and something else, uniquely him. "I have no intention of dishonoring our marriage," she said, her voice not quite steady. "But you cannot dictate my friendships." "I do not seek to dictate. I seek to understand." His voice softened. "Tell me honestly, Felicity, do you regret our marriage? Do you wish you had refused me? Damn the financial consequences." She had never heard him use her given name before. The intimacy of it struck something deep within her. She looked up into his face and saw not arrogance or calculation, but genuine uncertainty, perhaps even vulnerability. "I do not know what I wish," she confessed. "A month ago I would have said yes without hesitation, but now—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Now," he prompted softly, "now I find myself confused. You are not the man I expected. You are harder in some ways, but softer in others. You are arrogant and presumptuous, but also unexpectedly kind to my children. You own gambling hells but fund orphanages. I do not know what to make of you, Dominic." His eyes widened slightly at her use of his name. His hand loosened on her wrist, becoming a caress rather than a restraint. "Perhaps you do not need to make anything of me. Perhaps we could simply attempt to know each other honestly without the armor we both wear." Before Felicity could respond, a knock interrupted. Mrs. Harriet entered, looking distressed. "Forgive me, but you must come quickly. Edmund has been injured." Terror flooded through Felicity. She rushed upstairs to find her son sitting on his bed, holding a cloth to his forehead. His tutor, Mr. Pemberton, hovered anxiously nearby. "What happened?" she demanded. "A stupid accident," Edmund said, trying to sound brave, though his voice shook. "I was climbing the oak tree in the garden, and the branch broke. I fell and struck my head on a root." Felicity knelt before her son, gently moving the cloth to examine the wound. There was a deep gash above his right eye, bleeding profusely. Her medical knowledge was limited, but she knew enough to recognize that it would require stitching. "We need a physician," she said. "Send for Dr. Thornfield immediately." "There is no time," Ravenscar said from the doorway. "The wound is bleeding heavily. It must be closed now." He crossed to Edmund's washstand, rolled up his sleeves, and began methodically washing his hands. "I have some experience with this sort of injury. If you trust me, I can stitch it." "You?" Felicity stared at him in shock. "Gambling establishments attract rougher clientele than polite society, Your Grace. I've stitched more wounds than I care to count. The alternative is waiting an hour for Dr. Thornfield to arrive, during which time Edmund could lose dangerous amounts of blood." Edmund looked at his mother, then at Ravenscar, then back to his mother. "I trust him, Mother." Felicity felt her heart clench, but nodded. "Do it." She watched in amazement as Ravenscar transformed into someone utterly focused and competent. He worked quickly, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wound, threaded a needle from his own sleeve, and began making small, precise stitches. Edmund whimpered once, but held still, biting his lip. "You're doing excellently," Ravenscar murmured. "Your father would be proud of your courage." When he finished, the wound was neatly closed. The bleeding stopped. He bound it with clean cloth and stepped back. "Keep it dry for a week. Dr. Thornfield can examine it tomorrow and confirm I've done it properly. You'll have a distinguished scar. Women find them romantic." Edmund managed a weak smile. "Thank you, sir. Truly." After her son was settled for sleep, Felicity found Ravenscar in the study, cleaning blood from beneath his fingernails. She entered quietly and closed the door. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. "In the gutters of London, when I was rebuilding my fortune and could not afford a physician," he said, without looking up. "In the back rooms of my establishments, when brawls broke out and men were too ashamed to seek proper medical care. You learn what you must to survive, Your Grace." Felicity crossed the room and placed her hand over his, stilling his movements. "Thank you. You likely saved Edmund from serious harm." He looked up at her, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight. "He is a good boy. You have raised him well." "His father raised him well," Felicity corrected softly. "I have merely tried to continue what Thomas began." "Your late husband was a fortunate man," Ravenscar said quietly. "He had love, family, respect, everything I was denied. And yet you survived. You built an empire from nothing. That requires extraordinary strength. Or extraordinary bitterness." His smile was self-mocking. "I am not certain which drives me more, the desire to succeed or the need to prove wrong every person who dismissed me." Felicity found herself moving closer, drawn by something she could not quite name. "Perhaps it is both. Perhaps we are all driven by contradictory impulses, and the truly strong learn to harness them rather than being destroyed by them." They stood very close, her hand still covering his. The study was warm, intimate, the fire casting dancing shadows. Felicity became aware that they were alone, truly alone, in a way they had not been since their wedding night. Her heart began to race. "Felicity," Ravenscar said softly, and the way he spoke her name sent shivers through her. "I am trying very hard to honor our agreement, to maintain proper distance, but you make it devilishly difficult when you look at me like that." "Like what?" she whispered. "Like I am not a monster. Like I might be worth knowing." He lifted his free hand and traced the line of her jaw with one finger, the touch feather-light. "I am not a good man, Felicity, but I find myself wanting to be better. For you, for your children, for this life we are building." Felicity's breath caught. She should step back. She should remember all the reasons she had married him: duty, financial necessity, protection for her family. She should recall her vow never to let another man claim authority over her heart. But instead, she leaned into his touch. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Ravenscar's mouth captured hers with a hunger that had been leashed since their wedding, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. His arms came around her, pulling her against his solid frame. Felicity's hands slid up to his shoulders, then into his dark hair, anchoring herself as the world tilted. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Ravenscar rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates things," he murmured. "Yes," Felicity agreed, but she did not pull away. "Our agreement specified separate lives." "Yes. Do you want to maintain that agreement?" He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Felicity looked at her husband, this complicated, infuriating, surprising man, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. "No," she whispered. "No, I find I do not." The winter deepened, but within Ashford House, something new and fragile was blooming. Felicity and Ravenscar navigated their transformed relationship with cautious wonder, learning to be not merely spouses of convenience, but genuine partners. They still maintained separate chambers. Some proprieties must be observed, but the distance between them had narrowed considerably. Ravenscar began dining at home regularly, engaging in lively debates with Felicity about everything from workhouse reform to the latest novels. He taught Edmund advanced mathematics and the principles of investment. He took Charlotte riding in Hyde Park, patient with her enthusiasm and her endless questions. To Felicity's amazement, her children were developing genuine affection for their stepfather. "He is not like father," Edmund confided one evening, "but he is not trying to be. He is himself, and I find I quite like him." Society's rehabilitation of the Earl of Ravenscar accelerated as his marriage to the Dowager Duchess was seen to be not merely respectable, but apparently affectionate. Invitations flooded in. Hostesses competed to secure the couple's attendance. Ravenscar's donations to charitable causes were praised in the newspapers. He was even granted admission to Almack's, the ultimate seal of social acceptance. Dr. Thornfield called one final time, ostensibly to check Edmund's healing wound. The boy's scar was neat, already fading. The doctor examined it with professional approval. "Lord Ravenscar did excellent work," he admitted grudgingly, "better than many trained physicians could have managed." Afterward, Felicity walked him to the door. Thornfield paused on the threshold, his kind eyes studying her face. "You care for him," he said quietly. "Your husband. I can see it." Felicity did not deny it. "I did not expect to. But yes, I have come to care for him deeply." Thornfield nodded, though something sad flickered in his expression. "Then I am glad for you, Your Grace, truly, though I confess I had hoped." He trailed off, then smiled ruefully. "But that is neither here nor there. You deserve happiness, and if you have found it with Ravenscar, then my personal disappointment is irrelevant." "You are a good man, Dr. Thornfield," Felicity said sincerely. "You will find someone who can appreciate you without the complications I bring." "Perhaps." He took her hand briefly. "Be happy, Your Grace, and know that if you ever need a friend, I remain at your service." After he departed, Felicity found Ravenscar in the study, though she suspected he had deliberately made himself scarce during Thornfield's visit. "You sent him away," Ravenscar observed, not looking up from his correspondence. "There was nothing to send away. He is a colleague and friend, nothing more." "He wanted to be more." "Yes," Felicity agreed, moving to stand beside his desk. "But I did not, because somewhere in the past months, despite my best intentions and most fervent vows, I fell in love with my husband." Ravenscar's head snapped up, his grey eyes wide with shock. "You... what?" "I love you," Felicity repeated, her heart racing but her voice steady. "You are arrogant and infuriating. You made your fortune through means I do not entirely approve. You coerced me into marriage, but you are also brilliant and surprisingly kind. You honor your word. You treat my children with respect and affection. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as the scandalous Earl who threatened my family and began seeing you as Dominic, the man who stitches wounds and teaches mathematics and makes me laugh when I least expect it." Ravenscar rose from his chair slowly, circling the desk to stand before her. His hands cupped her face with infinite gentleness. "I have loved you since the day you faced me down in your receiving room, all aristocratic fury and protective determination. You stood there like an avenging angel and told me exactly what you thought of me. In that moment, I knew I had to have you. Not merely for your name and respectability, but for you, for the woman who contained both steel and compassion, who would sacrifice anything for her children, who refused to be cowed by threats or circumstances. His thumbs brushed away tears Felicity had not realized were falling. I have spent my entire life fighting to prove I was worth something. But you made me want to be worth something, not to society, but to you. You made me want to deserve you. You do deserve me, Felicity whispered, as I deserve you. We are both flawed, Dominic. We have both made choices we are not entirely proud of. But together, perhaps we can build something better than either of us could have managed alone. They kissed, and it was different from the desperate passion of that first time in the study. This was deeper, a claiming and a promise intertwined. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Our contract specified separate lives, Ravenscar murmured against her hair. Contracts can be renegotiated, Felicity replied. I believe we should draft a new agreement, one that reflects our current circumstances more accurately. And what terms would you propose? Felicity pretended to consider. A true marriage in all respects, a partnership of equals, a commitment to support each other's work and respect each other's independence, and perhaps in time the possibility of expanding our family. Ravenscar's eyes blazed with emotion. I accept those terms unconditionally, Your Grace. When shall we formalize this new agreement? I believe we just did, Felicity said, pulling him down for another kiss. The months that followed brought changes to Ashford House. Ravenscar moved from the Blue Suite to chambers adjoining Felicity's, still separate rooms for propriety's sake, but with a connecting door that remained permanently unlocked. He began divesting himself of his gambling establishments, selling them to carefully vetted buyers with strict requirements about honest play and responsible management. The capital freed was invested in industrial enterprises and charitable works, hospitals, schools, housing for working families. I am done living in the shadows, he told Felicity one morning as they reviewed investment opportunities together. You brought me into the light. I intend to stay here. Their partnership extended beyond the personal. Felicity's charitable work expanded exponentially with Ravenscar's business acumen and resources behind it. They became known as a formidable team, the Dowager Duchess with her passion for reform and the Earl with his brilliant strategies for implementation. The Metropolitan Widows Fund became a model for similar organizations across England. Dr. Thornfield's clinic expanded to serve 3 times as many patients. A new school for working-class children opened in Whitechapel with a modern curriculum and well-paid teachers. Society, which had once gossiped about the scandalous marriage, now praised the Earl and Countess of Ravenscar as paragons of enlightened aristocracy. The couple appeared regularly in the social pages, photographed at charity galas, parliamentary debates, and royal garden parties. The Prince of Wales himself remarked that Ravenscar had achieved the remarkable feat of making virtue fashionable. One spring evening, nearly a year after their wedding, Felicity stood in the garden watching Charlotte and Edmund play croquet, while Ravenscar looked on with amusement. Mrs. Harriet joined her, linking their arms companionably. "You seem content, my dear," the older woman observed. "I am," Felicity replied, surprised by how completely true it was. A year ago, I would have said my life was over, that I had been forced into an intolerable situation by a ruthless man. But I was wrong. My life was not ending. It was beginning. And the ruthless man. Felicity smiled, watching as Ravenscar scooped Charlotte up when she stumbled, eliciting delighted giggles from the girl. The ruthless man turned out to be something far more interesting. A complex human being capable of both darkness and extraordinary light. He pushed his way into my sanctuary and forced me to see beyond my carefully constructed walls. I resented him for it. Now I thank him. Mrs. Harriet squeezed her arm. Your late husband would approve, I think. Thomas wanted you to be happy. He would be glad you found that happiness again, even in an unexpected form. I hope so, Felicity said softly. I will always love Thomas's memory, but I have learned that the heart is capable of holding multiple loves, the warm affection of the past and the fierce passion of the present. They do not diminish each other, they coexist. Ravenscar looked up and caught her eye across the garden. The smile he gave her was private, intimate, full of promise. Felicity felt her heart swell with emotion so profound it almost hurt. She had spent 5 years vowing never to remarry, building walls to protect her independence and her children. Then a scandalous earl had threatened her family, forcing her into a marriage she never wanted. But in doing so, he had given her something she had not known she needed, a true partner who challenged her, supported her, loved her without trying to possess her. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford had found freedom not in isolation, but in partnership. She had discovered that true strength lay not in refusing to need anyone, but in choosing the right person to need. And she had learned that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as threats, forcing us to bloom in ways we never imagined possible. As the sun set over the garden, casting golden light over her assembled family, Felicity realized she was precisely where she was meant to be, not in a golden cage of privilege and loneliness, but in a life of purpose, passion, and unexpected joy. She had vowed never to remarry. A scandalous earl had made that vow impossible to keep, and in breaking it, he had set her free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed Felicity and Dominic's journey, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic historical romances, and leave a comment telling me which part of the story touched your heart the most. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing these stories to life. Until next time, may you find your own unexpected happiness.